Hello and welcome to this week's Aiding Your Game. In the last couple of videos, we went through and started looking at how to build an adventure from scratch using random rolls in the Dungeon Master's Guide, as well as a little bit of creativity. We're going to continue working on that adventure this week, and possibly a couple more videos to follow. So grab up your paper, pencil, DM Guide, Monster Manual, and let's get to it. Now, before we jump into this week's video, I do have to ask that you go down and hit that subscribe button. Also, hit that bell if you don't mind getting notifications when we post new content. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoy this content, and leave a comment down below so that we can interact with you better and help answer questions and create content that's going to be most impactful and helpful to you. Now, in the last set of videos, we went through and did a quick doodle map. As we started laying out the bones of our adventure, we put it together in a skeleton so that we knew what was going to be the focus of the adventure, where it was going to be happening. Started getting some idea based on the random rolls we used from the Dungeon Master's Guide. Here's a quick recap of what we went over. We rolled that we're going to have the adventure be returning home from a distant place with a villain who's misguided humanoid zealot, an NPC who is a revenge seeker, and an NPC who's a respected elder as a patron. Now, of course, the next thing we really have to start looking at is the villain of the story. We had some good ideas on the NPCs, and we'll flesh them out in a little bit more detail later on. Today, we want to look at just the villain proper, the antagonist for this adventure. Now, we know that the adventure is happening en route from the waypoint to the town. It's a location-based adventure, so it's not in a dungeon. It's all about that journey. This is one of the ways that we can also start thinking about how we make journey portions impactful in our other games. So be mindful of that as well. Now, in our roughly made map, we wanted to lay out a tight corridor that the players have to get through and travel, possibly through swamps and some hilly areas. We laid out a number of encounters for them to start happening on in that journey. But the biggest question here is, what characters? Of course, if you were making an adventure for a party that you've already got assembled and you've already got character levels and stats, it's going to be easier to work this process. Initially, that was my plan, was to create this adventure for one of the groups that I currently DM for. However, to change it up and just be as fluid as possible to help you in preparing an adventure, I decided I would throw all of that out the window. We're going to look at this in 3 different ways. We'll settle on one. Now, if we're creating an adventure for new players and we're wanting them to start out at level 1, then we can mark down approximate number of players that we're going to be anticipating to play in this game and what that CR rating should be based on their level of being level 1. We also can tell the players, as we're gathering them up to the table, that their characters should have the town as their hometown that they're returning to after developing their backstories. So if they were a sage or a soldier, an acolyte, or an urchin, now they're returning home after having decided to take up the life of an adventurer. Now, if you're already working with established group, higher levels, you're not going to be able to pull that because they should already have their backstories completed, and it's very doubtful that they'll want to re-change their backstory to make this location, this town, their hometown. One of the ways that you can go around that is, instead of having it be their hometown, it could be something that they were gifted a title or a deed for, a property in this town. So to return to their home, they've got to go on this adventure. And ultimately, if you're starting them at a higher level, even still, rather than making it a town where they'll have a property or a deed for an inn or a small home or manor, this could be a stronghold that they have to occupy to make their keep or their temple or their base of operations. And having a well-fortified area that has one set approach is very defendable, and your players should be able to bite into that storyline really easy. So you will have to think about the background a little bit, how you're going to tie your characters into the story of traveling home. Maybe instead of calling it home, you just say the destination, which could be a waypoint for the next adventure, but we'll get to that in the end. Now that we know that the journey is the adventure, they've got to struggle through the adventure to return home. I'm going to make this for low-level, first-level adventurers to be having an adventure on their way to their hometown. And because many of the bones we've already laid out, all we have to do in this segment is focus on the villain. Now, to help me with that, I've got a sheet that I made that just helps me keep track of the villains in a friendly format. You can do this on scratch paper, you can do it on a Google Docs or Word, whatever program you like. I'm just going to be using this format because I'm very used to it and I utilize it in game. If you've got questions about this format, just let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to send you a copy of it. Now, as we're thinking about this villain, we really need to think about the area as well as the background that we were given from our random rolls. Because we know it's a humanoid zealot, that already takes out things like beasts or aberrations or possibly a lot of monstrosities. So we can focus on choosing a villain who's a humanoid and then have to work in that zealot background. Now, when we talk about a zealot background, what do I mean? Let's make sure we're all on the same page and have a good definition. So according to the Oxford dictionaries, a zealot can be a person who is fanatical and uncompromising in pursuit of their religious, political, or other ideals, or a member of an ancient sect that's aimed at world theocracy and resists. This says Romans, but could be any civilization. So if we go with the first definition, a person who is fanatical and uncompromising in pursuit of their religious, political, or other ideals, that gives us an idea of the person's thought process. What's focus for them? What are they going to be having as their driving force of making them the villain of our adventure? And we've got good ideas just based on the definition, and we've really established clearly what a zealot should be. Now, going into our monster manual, we can go through and start looking at humanoid races, and especially if we want to look at the area, the population, one of the things I often do looking for inspiration is go to the back where they have NPC types. And this is just an appendix with characters that you can pull with varied backgrounds that you can use as NPCs quickly. So it's just Appendix B, starts on page 342, and just covers a wide range of NPC types that you can pull into your games. And as we're looking at the NPCs, thinking of zealot, someone who is very fierce and staunch in their beliefs, there are a lot of options. Acolytes are one of the ones that really ring true and fit into our CR ratings of what we want to challenge the player characters with. And additionally, cultists and cult fanatics definitely fit that mold as well. And because we want these to be villainous characters, the cult fanatic and cultists is what I'm going to focus on writing this adventure with. Now, if you are keeping along, that's great. I hope you're taking the steps that we're using and putting them in play in your own way in utilizing the tools that we're using to fit your needs as well. But after we're done, we're going to put this together in a very fun and friendly format and get it up to DriveThruRPG, where you'll be able to get it yourself exactly as we're creating it here. So I'm just going to be writing down the stats of the cult fanatic as well as the cultists, and then we'll come back to them to make sure we're hitting the right CR levels to challenge our party. So we know the climax is going to be traps and hazards and animated objects turn against the PCs while the villain attacks. And our villain is a misguided humanoid zealot. And looking at the monster manual in the appendix, we're going to flip back to the cult fanatic as our primary villain, and all of the stats, of course, provided for you, as well as the cultist for support, because we still have to work out the CR levels. So what I want to do is just get these from the monster manual into a usable format that I can have ready at the table to take notes on, track hit points, and initiative, items like that. So this is just a sheet I created. I'm going to put down the cult fanatic, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure I jot down that it's a medium humanoid, just for my own reference. Then I'm also going to assign an alignment, because that's going to be a reminder for me of how I want to play this villain. And then up here I'm going to put what the CR rating is and how much experience this NPC is worth. And then we're just going to move on and continue filling out right out of the monster manual with armor class of 13 because of its leather armor. Hit points 33 is the average, but I also want to jot down what the maximum would be, because oftentimes we find that our players can breeze through. So I'm going to jot them both. Then just continuing to write down all the stats. And as I said, I've created this sheet, I use it at my own tabletop. It's quick, easy reference. I know I'll get a lot of comments on having the scores on the top and the modifiers on the bottom, but I do have them highlighted so I can find them quick and easy. And just putting down the skills that this primary villain, or misguided humanoid zealot, has, and into the senses. And again, just copying everything right out of the book, because we're just making this adventure and starting to put flesh on the bones. We're not doing a whole lot of tweaking. And speaking common, of course, the most common language is common. And then tactics, here's where we start putting in some of the information that the villains have as far as maneuvers and tactics. So just making sure that we jot it down. And again, I put it in this format because it's easy for me to quickly go through without having to flip back and forth in pages of the book. I can have this just like a player would a character sheet right at the table. And all I need to do is just transfer the information. I do it in pen. That way I can make notes or cross things out, add things in with pencil, but I can reuse the template. If I want to have this villain possibly have a cult fanatic brother, I can go through and just erase things out or write things in with a pencil, and I'm able to reuse the sheet. So I try to be a little frugal on that front because I'm doing this on a separate sheet. And then at notes, here's where I'm going to put the spells that the cult fanatic has. And starting just with the cantrips that they can cast at will, of course following the rules on spell casting. And fill them in so I can start looking at how many spells he can cast per long rest, just like you would a player character. That's one of the interesting things for me, is I approach villains very similar to how I approach player characters, because for dungeon masters, the encounters that you put in front of your character should not be static, should not just be standing there like grass ready to be mowed down, unless that's your play style, but to offer more opportunity for engagement and realistic immersion. If you treat your villains and NPCs as you would a character if you were a player, you'll find they have a lot more depth to them, create a bigger challenge for your players to overcome, which, when they do overcome them, is going to be that much more rewarding. So I always treat my villains as I would a player character for the most part. Now here I'm just adding in what the Cult Fanatics actions are for attacks, and this fellow gets multi-attacks, and it's 2 melee attacks. And I'm going to write down what those attacks are with the weapon, their 2-hit bonus, and type of attack, damage. So here, because it's a dagger, it's got melee as well as ranged. I'm going to separate those out because depending on how I play them, they could throw the dagger from a distance, or they could try to stab up close anybody who approaches. So I want to have them both kind of split out so it's easy for me to track while I'm playing, and write out their damage and the type of damage, just because you want to be aware of different resistances and things like that your players may have. And that's our Cult Fanatic, the bones of the Cult Fanatic. So it's a few more bones, but it's adding flesh onto our overall skeleton. And we're going to name the Cult Fanatic because I want to start thinking of them as a character in this adventure. They are a villain, but they're still a character. So I'm just going off of a random list that I have and putting a name on. And Elyrus Awfulheim sounds pretty nasty if you ask me. That's a good cult fanatic, a good cultist name. Awfulheim just reeks of evil. And they're going to be a follow of Lovitar, who is just a evil goddess. So just a few notes for myself so I can help start thinking more and more and creating more and more background for the character. And here we're going to just put down cultist because I want to pull the stats ahead of time. We don't know the CR rating for the encounters yet, but if there's a cult fanatic, it's very possible they've got further cultists. And I just follow the same exact process. Now, because these are going to be secondary characters, or guest starring characters, if you will, I'm not going to do the same level of detail. These will just be cult fanatics who are followers, and not quite as important as Awfulheim, but there for support. So I still want to have their stats ready to go. I'm going to keep them together with Awfulheim. That way when we're establishing the CRs and further fleshing out the other encounters, I could possibly use cultists in multiple encounters in this adventure. So by getting everything prepped ahead now, I'm going to be saving myself time in our next set of videos when we're working on more encounters. And as I mentioned, this sheet here I created. I use it at all of my games. If you're interested in a copy of the sheet, please leave a comment down below and I'll be happy to email you a copy. You can see it does have our brand on it in a watermark, and that's just because I use this at all of my games. I use this sheet, and I'm happy to hand them out as long as you don't mind a little watermarking. It's definitely able to be sent to you should you request. Like I said, I find these just are an immense help at the table, and I do get a lot of use out of each sheet, so don't be afraid that it's cutting down trees or anything like that. I've also found times where after filling out from the monster manual, I'll actually get these and have them laminated to use further. But quick, simple process.
Now this is where in your Dungeon Master's Guide, page 81 really starts diving into encounter building. We're going to use those same pages to build out our encounters with the thought process that, as you've most likely seen online, CR is a little challenging and should only be used as a guideline. I'll say it again. These steps are really created for new DMs and new players to start in the game. So we know it's going to be skewed a little bit easier and quicker to adapt for new players. So we'll take some of that into thought as we're building the encounters and assigning the CR levels. Now looking at page 82, we have our XP thresholds by character level. Here's where we really have to decide what level are we going to set this adventure. So I'm going to set this for first level characters. So that means a medium encounter is going to be 50 experience per character. So each character that plays this adventure having a medium encounter will get 50 experience points. We're going to jot that down. We're going to note it. I'll show you the format in a separate video, but that's our mainstay. Now I'm putting that information in a chart to show if I had 6 characters, what would the total be for those XP thresholds. This helps me determine, based on the number of players I anticipate, what the overall encounter should be. So generally you see most tables be 4 to 6 players. 5 is kind of an ideal standard, but I'm going to build this out for 5 with an allotment up to 6. That way we can have 4 to 6 players level 1. And I'm going to err on the side of caution and build it for 6. Now here comes some more math on page 84 with Adventuring Day XP. We're not going to go through and chart it and all of that. I've done it enough that I can tell you that at first level the total adventuring day should equal 300 per character. So that's an average of 6 medium encounters. So with 6 medium encounters, we can be very assured that we're having the right amount of adventuring day XP for the characters. Feel free to do the math, but I can guarantee you that 6 medium encounters as specified in the DM is a good starting guideline. And that's what we're going off of, is guidelines. Now the next bit of math is based on the encounter multipliers. And that means if we have cultists working with our cult fanatic, or the animated armors or traps, what is the multiplier by having multiple enemies match the player characters? So this is going to be used, and this, in my opinion, is what brings down some of the challenge rating. And I will still use it because it's a guide that we're going to be following in the DM's guide, but you could skip this part if you feel your players are pretty good tactical players who don't need to use these multipliers, but we will. So I've gone through and broken down the encounters, 6 of them that we planned for this adventure, into levels. And the DM's guide does have more details on this, but I blended 2 mediums to make 1 hard, and I split 1 medium to make 2 easy encounters. That'll be the 6 encounters we build in this adventure. Now we know Elyrus Offelheim, our cult fanatic, is worth 450 XP, so that will be the hard encounter, and we'll save that for the end. Now that we've got these scores and knowing that the cultists are worth 25, as we're building our other encounters, we can use the multipliers to decide how we're going to assign the number of encounter adversaries for our player characters to experience or interact with. But we know that Offelheim is going to be the hard part of this adventure. And just like a regular player character, here I would also review the individual as well as the horde, treasure, and get some notes taken.
Well, now we've got some flesh on the bones. We've created our bones, assembled our skeleton, and started putting some thought behind the villains that the players will be facing in this adventure. We've got a good storyline, we've got good hook in, and we've got a progression of events. And just like that, we have our CR levels established. We've gone through and assigned out where the main villain is going to be activated in regards to the adventure, how the cultists are going to be tied into that cult leader.
Now our next step, which we'll do in the next video, is going to be fleshing out the remaining encounters, because after all, we saw the adventuring day doesn't consist of just one encounter. In this adventure alone, we plan to have approximately 6 encounters. So now going through and using creativity in our next video to assign those other encounters, make everything tie in together based on the landscape that we created out of step 3. We're going to be able to piece everything together and have a cohesive storyline to challenge the players from their waypoint to their hometown with encounters that make sense leading up to our villain. Make sure you leave comments below of what you've thought of the steps we've taken here, what you would change, what you liked, and what's giving you inspiration in creating your own adventure. Also, let me know if you're going to be following along and creating as you go, because I do anticipate putting all of this together in a very printer-friendly format and getting it for free for everybody who follows on DM's Guild for your downloading pleasure. Make sure to hit that bell for notifications as we continue this series of Let's Build an Adventure Together. Thanks for checking out that video. Hope you enjoyed it. Make sure, if you haven't already, please subscribe. Also, if you don't mind getting the notifications, be sure to hit that bell so you can see when we're posting new content. Give us a thumbs up just so we can help reach new audience members. And leave a comment and let us know what you thought of this video, just so we can help create better content and better react to what you need. Additionally, here's another video we think you may enjoy. And, of course, be sure to hit that subscribe. And, of course, please be sure to let us know, where will your adventures take you?